And here we are for an extra early version of Dualistic Unity Raw, uh, our 102nd episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. I'm pretty stoked, man, I gotta say, just because we have the retreat coming up, but also because, as I was kind of reflecting on yesterday, it's really not about the words. And it's so very interesting because after a while, after you start chasing the philosophy, after you start getting lost and trying to find the concept, what's the insight that'll set me free? And you become an insight junkie, as it were, because then you're like, gotta be feeling like I'm changing all the time. Gotta be looking for that next obvious piece that's making me feel like I'm going down the path. It's like that's all happening. You don't have to be so surprised by it. You don't have to be so excited about it. Resist the urge to be astonished. You're changing. Insights are going to happen a lot. They're not always going to feel so jarring, and they're not going to always be the point, because you'll go through a whole day where you'll have 1,000 insights and none of them are going to make you stop and go, oh my God, or break down in tears or any of that stuff. But each one will be profound and important to your day. It's just that you'll start to recognize that insight is something that happens all the time when you're not in the way, when you're not afraid, when you're not clutching desperately to what you think you know. So, that all said, as you get used to that, it really is just about application, integration. It's not just about the insights. It's not just about talking the talk. It's about walking the walk. It's about those moment to moment interactions where you get frustrated or you get disappointed or you get caught up in a thought about the future or you get caught up in a thought about the past or you get caught up in a thought about someone else. All of those moments, those are the moments when it's really about the application. And the only way to truly apply anything in those moments is to listen to your feelings, is to listen how you're feeling about that moment, because it's indicative of what you're doing to yourself. And that's it. And you can't intellectualize yourself to sensitivity. You just can't. When you're in the shit, it's not going to help you at all to go looking for your notes about being present, because now you're going to look for notes about being present. But to remember to breathe, to remember to relax, to remember, I don't know. And not as a mantra, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, but just a simple recognition, which is again what happens over time. And then just giving yourself the space to act differently. But it's the integration that really is the big part of it. And I say this because it's really important, on the one hand, to tell yourself, or to not tell yourself that you're not getting this. But it's also really important not to tell yourself that you're getting this, because neither of them are true. There is no you to get this. There is the experience of what is. There is the experience of what it is you are and what you're going through. But that's not what you think it is. What you think it is part of that experience.
Yeah, because and as you were saying that, I was thinking, which you expressed, like who's getting it, and how many things there are, and it's like, oh man, I feel myself, and it's kind of been reflected in our last couple calls, like when it isn't so much about the words anymore, and it is about the application. There's a sense of letting go of yourself in a way that is different, that you're able to very, very easily maintain when you feel like it is about the words, when it's when it's you getting it. Like there is someone here to get it, then there is some degree of prioritization of yourself over, your idea of yourself over the reality that you are. And that's what it's just been hitting me a lot, just how many things there are, that there is the priority of, me and whatever I think I am, but then it goes hand in hand with, the other end of the spectrum with that, where there's the repercussions of, the focus on being something that's separate from anything. But that's, a can be a jarring thing, but it's also not, because it's still you're still living, you're still doing everything that you're doing. There's just a difference in priority, because the priority that previously existed was to build something that wasn't actually you. It's just like to build this fucking like imaginary thing that you think is getting you somewhere, or doing something that isn't actually doing it. Like, oh, I want to feel better about myself in some way, shape, or form, or be seen in a certain way, or be looked at in a certain way, or whatever, or get to a spot. And it's like, the sort of common thing that we strive for as a society, in a sense, is like to be looked at in a specifically curated way that makes us feel better, as opposed to hanging that idea of you out to dry and just continuing to exist and live fluidly, and just being willing to be free in yourself. But that then shifts your priorities and your actions and the things that you do and the way that you live. And it goes hand in hand with, the actions that you take and the things that you're experiencing. And so when it does come down to the actions, and it's not about you getting it or not getting it, because to your point, that's not even that part of it. Whether you get it or not is kind of irrelevant, because either way, you're reinforcing this thing that's separate. And then that doesn't have to do so much with the application of things. And the application is actually letting go of the perspective that there is someone to get it that's separate from anything. And then that willingness to let go of even the idea, the question of, do I get this or don't I get this, is stepping into uncertainty, freedom, fluidity. And there's not so much for you to, measure yourself by, but that's where all the stress, tension, all of those, perceived negative experiences come from, is from the idea of me being something that's experiencing something that can get something. And so without that, like, your actions inevitably shift, and the application, it's more, and that is, I guess, the application is the willingness to let go of the certainty that you're something that's existing in reality as reality. And like, oh man, it's like, it's a weird, because I want to have the idea that it's jarring, but at the same time, it's like, it's not. And it's just unfamiliar. It's just uncertain. And so it's not even what I think, because even that is still my opinion of what it is. And like, that's then reinforcing this thing that's separate when I'm not. And it all, like, oh God, so much of it ties together. But yeah, it's not about you getting it or not getting it at all, because that actually, I don't want to say isn't getting it, but that's not what it's about. It reinforces this illusion that isn't what you actually are.
Yeah, watch kids when they're enthusiastically doing their thing. They get it. They're not thinking about themselves. They're just enthusiastically involved with what they're doing. And I mean, really young kids for the most part. But this ties into a question that we have from the audience here. Hello, audience. Glad that you could join us. We know that it's earlier than usual. My friend has started acting sort of pseudo enlightened recently and has been saying nothing matters. What do you think about this? Is this a common thing? Well, I think more or less your friend is saying that nothing matters in terms of nothing is personal. Like, it doesn't matter about you. And that's true. Things are happening. It's really not personal. It's not about you. It's not about your value, your potential. Nothing means anything about you. And we spend so long thinking that it does, that eventually when we come to the realization that it doesn't, it comes across as nothing matters. And that's fine, but it's not always understandable for somebody who doesn't necessarily see it that way. And of course, that opens the door to nihilism, which somebody had asked about recently. How do you deal with nihilism? I don't know, the recognition that you can respond to anything in any way. It's kind of like, how do you deal with aloneness? The fact that nothing has any intrinsic meaning about you specifically isn't necessarily a depressing thing unless you're really self-absorbed and need it to be. And if you need things to have a meaning about you, then it's depressing when they don't. But otherwise, the stars are just as beautiful, regardless of the fact that they may not mean anything at all. Right? So, back to your question about nothing matters, I don't necessarily think it's as simple as it sounds. I think that there are layers to it, that nothing matters about you as a person. That isn't to say that nothing matters in how it happens. This person wouldn't lack empathy for somebody else, let's say, like nothing matters, doesn't matter if that person's getting hurt or not. That's different. I think they're talking specifically in terms of nothing matters about them. It's not personal. And that's a big insight. Can seem a little jarring at first, but it gets easier as you go. And eventually it just becomes recognized as freedom.
Yeah, and the realization that nothing has that inherent mattering, I guess, it doesn't take away from the appreciation for did I glitch for a second? All right. For appreciation, take the stars, for example. Like, there isn't necessarily something that matters inherently one way or the other. It's just kind of like something that is, or a beautiful sunset or a waterfall or the experience that you're having, whatever it is. Like, that whole narrative that nothing matters doesn't take away from the potential for appreciation of reality or existence or just experience itself. But I think initially, especially, it's common to come across and it be something that I think a lot of people settle upon as being like being the answer, almost in response to the way that society exists right now, in a sense. Because I know for me, like, that was a couple years ago, made a lot of videos about that, and I haven't in the same way, because there's like a different tone to things. Because for me, there were so many shifts in just my perspective of thinking that things objectively do matter. Like, there are like the societal blueprint is not just some fucking shit that we made up. It's like I had this idea that it was kind of inherent to reality, like to the way that we exist. Like, things do inherently matter, have meaning. Like, there's someone guiding this. There's something there's a God guiding this that has a plan, and so therefore things matter. There's people above you who are telling you how to do things and the right way to live and the right way to exist. And as long as you believe that that's the case to any degree, like, the realization that nothing matters, or it doesn't have the meaning that you thought that it did, is very freeing and jarring, and it's just a big change and shift in that perspective. But then that can be, again, because that's not just this objective sort of thing, it can be perceived in tons of different ways, the idea that nothing matters. And so it's, why do anything versus why not do anything. And so it's still an entire spectrum in that statement. It's not like a guarantee that, oh, nothing matters, therefore it's freeing, therefore I'm gonna do all these things in certain ways. It's just another insight that has the potential to be viewed in any different way, shape, or form. But there's the desire, I think, with any strong insight like that, to pass off responsibility to the insight itself, and the realization, oh, nothing matters, as opposed to seeing that as a stepping stone, like psychedelics or weed or something gives you the opportunity to see things in a certain way. Like, realizing that nothing matters gives you the opportunity to see things like, oh, the way that I thought things were may not be so, but it's still my responsibility to, do something with it. It's not this end all be all, like, this is, getting this tattooed on my chest, this is my new religion, this idea that nothing matters. It's just an insight that has the potential to be taken any which way. But if you're holding on to this idea that, things do objectively matter and have this underlying meaning that's separate from you and being given to you, then it can shake that enough. But then if that becomes the answer as opposed to your experience, and that just being a sort of stepping stone to inform your experience, and then be done with that, then that changes the narrative behind that phrase itself.
I want to go back quickly. We have another question regarding nihilism, but I want to go back to an expression that was used in the original question, pseudo enlightened. And I've heard this before, and so I want to address this. The idea of somebody being pseudo enlightened or pseudo enlightenment is really based on the misunderstanding of enlightenment as a whole. Because when we say pseudo, we mean fake. Right? It's fake enlightenment. It's not real enlightenment. Enlightenment's not. It's not a thing. It doesn't exist. Right? Like if enlightenment is anything, it's just a moment of clarity, recognizing that there is nothing for you to be other than what you are. There you are. You're enlightened. The veil has been lifted. You know, the clouds have parted. The fog is no longer there. Now you are reality, here and now. But that's a moment to moment thing. And in those moments of relaxation, regardless of how egotistical we might be, in a moment of clarity, when we have an insight, that is enlightenment. If you really want to talk about it, that's enlightenment. It doesn't have to be an ongoing state of affair, because that's something that we learn over time. This is something that we learn by oscillating in and out of the fog, in and out of clarity. So rather than disregarding somebody's insight just because they're not the complete perfect Buddhist monk image that you might have in your head about enlightenment, look at the source, look at where it's coming from, because we are all reality. We are all what is speaking, regardless of the perception that it might be coming from or the perception that's interpreting it. The fact is that somebody is who is quote unquote enlightened, somebody who is present, would listen to everybody equally because they all have value. There is no such thing as enlightenment. So rather than judging an insight or where it's coming from, or judging the distortion that comes back into that person's life after that moment of clarity, look at it as a valuable step. And this is something that they follow up with. You know, I agree with what you're saying, but his realization is paired with some nihilism, some hedonism, some metaphysical materialism too. Right. That's the process. That's the process. What do you mean by hedonism? That it's all about him or it's all about them? It's kind of a necessary part of the process too, until you start recognizing that everyone's you, that the idea of yourself is not necessarily the case, but you have to start out being selfish genuinely in order to understand that that goes full circle to selfishness or to selflessness. Right. So that's important, as well as the nihilism, as well as the metaphysical materialism too. And I'm assuming that you're talking about manifestation, which again leads to a realization that there is no division. The only thing that's blinding them to that is their wants and their desires. But that goes with the original insight that nothing matters. And so you see, it's a deepening process. It's a deepening change over time. But there are moments of enlightenment. To have a constant state of enlightenment is just to be yourself, and it looks nothing like what you might think enlightenment looks like.
Yeah, it's like it's willing to step through without so many thoughts about, you know, yourself stepping through it, and willing through with in that state of freedom that is just raw uncertainty and continuing to go on. But that shift that you mentioned in like sort of the process and how it plays out from believing that you're something that's separate, it's like, you know, you start by prioritizing yourself and that realization that it's not about, you know, someone else's perspective or your assumption about someone else's perspective, but then there's the ability to stagnate upon, you know, if you see yourself as something separate, the prioritization of yourself is you as something separate, and that's very different than the prioritization of yourself as you not something separate. And there's a different viewpoint of yourself as a tool, as opposed to, you know, this thing that's separate from everyone else. And so with that sort of pseudo enlightenment and just the realization of everyone being that, like the perspective that we were talking about, I think we mentioned it maybe on a Patreon call, that it's not so much about recognizing one's own divinity as it is about recognizing everyone's divinity, and that inherently changes your actions as well, because there's like a equality in seeing yourself in the entirety of the interaction that you're having. And with that, it changes your perspective of things. So it's not so much about anyone thinking that anyone should be different than they are. It's like it comes down to how you're viewing them, how I'm viewing them relative to how I'm viewing myself. And you can't really have both. You can't really recognize you as something separately, a certain thing, and someone else as that. It's like you're either recognizing yourself in everyone or you're not. And so with the, that experience of enlightenment being just when you're present, fully involved, not thinking so much about your assumptions about yourself or anyone else, because they kind of go hand in hand as well. Like your assumptions about yourself and your assumptions about other people are kind of this on the same sort of plane of experience. And so without either of those, it's just what's left is the uncertainty, is the freedom, is the shift in perspective. And then it's not about getting anyone to act any differently than they are. It's just about yourself and seeing that, which then changes the actions. But then in that spot, it's not, there is no right or wrong way to act. It just changes it. And so, in our desire to have control or to know what to do or to think there's a right or wrong way or to follow directions or a 10 commandments or whatever it may be, like none of that exists in when you're just seeing yourself in everyone. So then it just comes down to you and your sensitivity to it. But there's no one to look to tell you how to act or what to do. And then it's just the process of building faith in yourself and realizing like, oh, I don't need someone to tell me what to do, because what could I hear from someone else that could have more efficacy or be have a better understanding of what I should do next than myself, because I've always been myself. And so the experience of that then allows you to build that faith in yourself. And then that's sort of a cumulative experience as well.
And that ties in really well to the next question. Would you consider yourself an optimistic, nihilistic person? And it's so interesting because it's kind of like what we mean when we're feeling good versus feeling bad, right? When you're optimistic versus pessimistic, we tend to think that that's an attitude towards things instead of a reflection of how much we doubt or have faith in ourselves. So, no, I would not consider myself to be a positive person. I just have faith in myself. I just don't doubt myself. And as a result, I have no reason to look at things, quote unquote, negatively, because I don't perceive there to be a division. And so there is less fear as a whole, because I'm not perceiving myself as much as somebody who should be responding to this in a certain way, somebody who's separate from it. So, no, I wouldn't consider myself to be positive. I would consider myself to be free. And when we're feeling resistant, when we're feeling negative, that's really the result of stress. That's the result of us having a negative self-image, of us telling ourselves that we can't have faith in what we are, trying to come up with an idea to have faith in, and that's a losing game. Because again, you're looking for meaning now, you're looking for purpose. And nihilism is just the understanding that there is nothing except right here and now. Right here and now. And whatever you want to do with that, none of it's wrong. You can make a story if you want to, you can get caught up in yourself, you can do all that. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's you doing it. And you're doing it for some very good reasons. And so it's important to remember that there is nothing wrong with getting caught up in yourself. You have a good reason to do so. The alternative is daunting, or at least can seem daunting, in the same way that driving a car would be daunting to an 8-year-old. There's a lot of things involved. There's a lot of responsibility involved in recognizing that you are what is, that there is no division. It changes everything that you do.
Yeah, because it's no longer about what perspective of yourself that you have. It's not having a perspective of yourself and being willing to not run back to that perspective of yourself. And it's so, oh man, it's so interesting how, like, as soon as there is the looking back, and again, it's like that Sodom and Gomorrah story. Like, oh man, it's getting harder and harder for me to find a reason to continue to look at that and like come up with a story or come up with a viewpoint or want a viewpoint, because it's like the back and forth is is very jarring in the sense of like not looking back and then looking back, whereas and it's like this variability in freedom versus weight, and I still have this perspective that there's something there when I look back, like there's some benefit when there's not, because I'm starting to see every time I do, it's like the implications of doing so, the feelings in certain ways. But there's then, as you said, a shift in your experience, an inevitable shift in your experience, in your actions, in your priorities, in all of that, that no longer involves so much fear and worry and concern, which is beautiful. And it's equally unfamiliar, and it's just like fuck. And whenever anyone comes to a retreat and they have some deeper insights, they're always like, oh, it's not what I thought it was, and it continues to not be what I think that it is. And it's just so interesting how long we've had this conversation, been talking about these things, and it's still sort of the same thing, just from a certain depth. And then there's so much more that comes into it when you're willing to, not think about yourself and like have that veil on top of your experience. But then it comes with the letting go of your opinion and your, priorities from some perspective that have been reinforced through years and years and years of believing that you're something that's separate, and thinking there's a right way and thinking there's a correct way to act to some degree. Because even the things we prioritize are still buying into there being a correct way to act, a right way to act. And it's still my desire for there to be something, as opposed to the letting go of my opinion of how to act, my opinion of what to do, my opinion and way I think I should live my life, or how my life should be going. And the letting go of that means the letting go of all of the things that I've done for a very long time to have that, to maintain that perspective, which is still, as much as I've said there's no right way to live, like there's a component of that that's letting go of your own opinion and your own desire for, the way that you thought your life was going to be, in a sense.
Because it's true, there is no right way to live. So how much would you like to suffer? Right? It really just comes down to, again, your relationship with the here and now. Like, there is no right way to live. You can judge yourself if you want to. You can invest in this fictional you. You can invest in all of the thoughts that measure your value up and down. There is no right way to live. You can do that. You can invest in this personal hell as much as you would like to, and all you're going to get out of it is this increasing feeling that you should be keeping up and that you feel separate from everybody else. And there's nothing wrong with that. We want to vilify it on a large scale. We want to look at the world and go, look at all of this division. Look at capitalism. Look at the evils of the system. We want to do that. And we can. Just makes us victims, just tears us down, just takes away from the efficacy that we have in each and every moment. Right? We can do that. The alternative is not. And to me, that's the only thing that I'm offering to people, is just this possibility. Maybe life would have a different outcome if we weren't always invested in this fictional me. Perhaps, and this is just based on life experience, my own and many other people, the experience of flow state, the experience of mastery, the experience of paying attention, of knowing the difference between when you're lost in thought versus when you're paying attention to what you're doing. Like, just in that, there is this clue that there is another way to live where we are already, in fact, acting intelligently, until we doubt ourselves. And we doubt ourselves because we invest in this fiction. So there is another path that we just don't explore. This is what Jesus was talking about the narrow path versus the wide path. The narrow path is traveled by few. The narrow path is faith. which is to let go of this fictional control, this fictional idea of yourself that allows you to measure how you're doing, how valuable you are compared to others, how you are doing in your progress compared to others, because it's all invested in that fiction of others, in that fiction of you as separate from them. The alternative is just being the whole. The alternative is just being yourself here and now. And that is reality in itself. And it's just that we just don't ever exercise faith in it. We are so used to dipping back into doubt. We're so used to dipping back into the idea that we need to control this through thought and assumption, because otherwise we don't know what to feel. We don't know how to feel about what we're feeling. And frankly, we don't know how to make sense of everything that we're going through because there's so much. And so instead of just having faith in our ability to go through that, because it is what we are, change is what we are, we grasp onto an idea and desperately try to make sense of things because we think it's going to make us feel better. And all it does is take us farther and farther away from the experience that would remind us that we're already strong enough to go through it.
Yeah, well said. And that experience of faith, no doubt, all of it, like how often going back to thoughts is sort of the experience of having doubt in yourself. And like, I feel like in our society and myself, like we've almost been able to maintain this idea that thinking isn't having doubt. Like, oh no, I can think my way to figure this out, and I can think my way, and I can focus on my thoughts to figure this thing out. And as long as I focus on the right thoughts, then I'll be able to come up with the right response and the best response. And it's always an expression of or a example, or the outcome of doubting yourself, like focusing on thoughts. Because true lack of doubt, true faith is stepping through without running back to thoughts, without running back to that mechanism of control, because it doesn't do the thing that we think that it does. It doesn't do the thing that I think that it does. Like having that, okay, let me think about this and ponder this, because then that's this idea that I can come up with something better than just expressing myself freely here and now, and just being free in myself right now and seeing what comes out. But there's the hesitation because there's this idea that there's a right or a wrong thing to do. And so I can't just trust myself to just express myself and be free in myself. I have to sit here and ponder and go through all of the considerations to make sure I do what's closer to the right thing and don't do what's the wrong thing. And so as long as those assumptions that there could be a right or a wrong way to exist, there's going to be the desire to ponder about what's going on to avoid the wrong thing and do the right thing. But without those, seeing that those don't exist as much, then it is just, there is more of a willingness to just continue stepping through uncertainty. And then it comes down to not figuring out whether it's the right or the wrong thing, because both of those are expressions of the doubt that you have in yourself. It's just about, do I doubt myself or don't I? And that is the willingness to continue to step through. But in order to not doubt yourself, you have to let go of the idea that there's a right or a wrong way to act, right or wrong way to live, right or wrong thing to say, right or wrong thing to do. And then that is an entirely different experience with the lack of doubt, because the doubt impacts so many of the things that we do, be it our responses to things, be it our willingness to step into things, be it our, just lack of trust in ourselves, step into the unfamiliar, step into the things that we've never tried before, never done before, and just being willing to step through it and find out. And so, we see that in the way that we live. And, as much as my life has changed a lot, I also hold on to plenty of things that I, have concern over stepping into new things. And without so much doubt in yourself, there isn't anything holding you back from doing that. And you see that there's all these things that are always there. They're just opportunities. They're not the right way to act or the right thing to do. They're just opportunities and a willingness to look at, all of the potential opportunities. And then with that uncertainty and freedom comes a clarity of, actions and looking at things as they are, as opposed to, clouded by the veil of your opinion, or there being a right or a wrong way, or a should or a shouldn't. But it's the difference between doubting yourself and having faith in yourself. It has nothing to do with figuring out the right thing to do or avoiding the wrong thing to do. It's just being willing to step through uncertainty without so much of a consideration of me. Like, how am I doing? Because as long as that's there, there's going to be the thought of the right or the wrong thing. And as soon as I think about myself, as soon as we think about ourselves, it's like that's when the potential for the doubt comes in. But without a thought about myself, there's not really anything to doubt so much. And so it's not that you're even having faith. It's just there isn't something and it's the experience of having faith, but it's not like you're having faith in something. It's just there isn't something there to doubt. And then you're just continuing to exist because there's not something holding you back. But there isn't like this sort of intentional thing where I'm doing this for a thing. It's just the cessation of the things, all the considerations that were holding you back, because there's the maintenance of this idea of you.
And that's not to say that you're not processing information. It's just that the fiction of you isn't in that information. And so you're much more likely to deal with things as they actually are, as opposed to things as you feel about them, right? Which is really what it is. It's funny because we have this idea, like, if I were to stop thinking about myself, what would stop me from doing stupid shit? Well, you're doing stupid shit now. I mean, that's kind of the whole thing. Like, we all are, because we get lost in thought. We get lost in doing stuff. But not only that, that's the process of learning. That's the process of learning, is going through trial and error. And we have this gift of being able to think about ourselves. And so we assume we're actually making the process of trial and error easier by shaming ourselves and judging ourselves during that process. But even slime mold, as we've talked about, will find its way through a maze eventually. And it doesn't do that by beating itself up. It does that by going down a direction that makes sense to it at the time, realizing it doesn't go anywhere, and then trying another direction. That's how intelligence works. But we have this ability to put like a narrative over top of what we're doing, and it just distorts what we're doing. It distorts the intelligence that we would be otherwise. But you see, that's really the trick, is to just be yourself and to recognize that there's nothing else to it. And that's what's really unsatisfying to a lot of people, especially in the non-duality spirituality crowd, the enlightenment bit, is the fact that it's like, well, what would I do if I wasn't doubting myself? Whatever it is you're doing. Whatever it is you're doing. See, that's the beautiful part about it. Stop thinking about it. You don't have to think about it. Just do it. Just do it. And you're gonna have thoughts, but most of them aren't going to revolve around you. They're going to revolve around what's being done, because you're letting go of this fiction. You're just getting involved with what you're doing. This is why it's so important to pay attention to things. It's so important to take things that require you to pay attention, to do things that require you to pay attention. Go for a bike ride. You'll realize very quickly that it's important to pay attention to what the bike is doing, not necessarily to how good you look while biking. It will definitely change the experience of biking, but that is exactly what we've been doing, is we get so caught up in the experience of, how am I doing? Do I look good while I'm doing this? Am I going faster than other people? And all of that we're just not keeping track of our balance. We're not actually enjoying the ride. We're trying to get somewhere, not realizing there's nowhere to go. Right? And that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with being here and going through it. It just means that we don't have to put so much pressure and stress on ourselves. We just don't. All of that is optional. We really just don't have to do it. It's just that it's something that we've done for so long. And again, big shout out to religion for driving that fucker home. Judging our progress, making sure we're living up to God's plan. Oh, that stupid shit. And I mean that. It is absolutely the worst goddamn message, that somehow you're in violation of God's will just because you're doing something that other people don't agree with, or that you beat yourself up for. How else does an organism learn? Again, how else does the slime mold find its way through that goddamn maze if not for trial and error? You don't think Intelligence, universal intelligence, the intelligence of nature, whatever the fuck you want to call it. You don't think intelligence goes through the process of trial and error? It's everywhere all the time. Look at a plant grow. Look at a plant try to break through concrete. It's going back and forth looking for a groove. It's going back, it's big digging in roots. Like, it's all trial and error. That's what intelligence is. Intelligence is trial and error and the recognition of patterns over time. It's not you and your idea of yourself. That is a consequence of intelligence. You can come up with a fictional you and dwell on it. Doesn't mean it's actually you. And it doesn't mean that's what intelligence is. The conceptual stuff that we get caught in, the process of reading and writing a book isn't intelligence. It's a result of intelligence, sure, but intelligence is what keeps your heart beating, keeps your lungs pumping air, keeps your brain moving. Intelligence is what keeps life flowing. It is not a university degree. We forget that. We really do. We actually think like, oh, well, unless you have a large vocabulary, you're not very intelligent. There are a lot of types of intelligence. This is the danger when we start looking at IQ tests, for example. Like, well, what's your IQ? There are a lot of types of intelligence that don't involve math or logic. Art, for example, is another form of intelligence. And what is art if not just expression? And the best art is expression without boundary. So again, what is intelligence?
Yeah, it's a great question, and not one that I think we consider very often. Like we've come up with such a specific narrative about intelligence and what that means and what it is, and this perspective that you have it or you don't, you have a certain amount of it or you don't, but how many variations of intelligence are there? And if it is, if intelligence is our lungs pumping air, even the act of breathing, digesting food, heart beating, all of that, then us acting without doubt would be the closest thing to that intelligence acting out, as opposed to I'm gonna sit. Like, imagine if your heart was thinking about when to beat. Like, it would be fucked. You die so fast. And or your lungs were like, if there was a consideration of how to do something as opposed to just continuing to do it without thought. And so of course, society and everything is so convoluted because it's the experience of intelligence considering or measuring itself as opposed to just being it, as opposed to just being what it is, because there's this perceived benefit to doing so, despite it just being arguably the most detrimental thing that we can do, is to ponder how intelligent something makes us look, as opposed to, or how something is making us look in any way, shape, or form, as opposed to just being it and finding out. And so how little time we spent in intelligence acting. And I think a lot of things go hand in hand, like the idea that, we're at peak society right now, kind of allows us to think that, oh, I don't have to step into uncertainty. I can stagnate because this is the best spot we've ever been. We've got it all figured out. This is the right way to live. This is, peak human experience right now is this. And it's just this massive assumption about history and everything, and human history, and like that there hasn't been some other society that was far more not intelligent, but far closer to pure intelligence being expressed, and how that plays out, and how many potential experiences there could be, and what human potential actually looks like, because we have this idea of what human potential looks like that's so incredibly limited based on me achieving something. Like, that's what so much of what our society and intelligence comes down to, is how can I utilize this to make me better than someone else? Like, so much of the things we value is in comparison. It's like, how can I put myself up on this pedestal, as opposed to just being the closest to intelligence being expressed? But you can't maintain so much of an idea of you, a consideration of how you're doing, and continue to be that intelligence expressed. Like, if there is the investment in me becoming something or being something, or being looked at in a certain way, or or being, an investment in a perception of myself, then it cuts off that intelligence from being expressed. And so there has to be the willingness to let go of that perspective that you're becoming something, or have something to fear, or something there to be judged, to allow that intelligence to be expressed and continue to be expressed, and the evolution continue to be allowed to be had. And if there's the investment in me being something, living in the right way, it's like that intelligence being expressed almost hits the pause button. And it's like that, both individually, collectively, as a society, it's like we've hit the pause on intelligence being expressed. And there's the inevitable impact of change being resisted, because there's the investment in this thing that now has intelligence, that has attained intelligence, as opposed to the realization that I am just intelligence, and continuing to find out where that goes, which there's no direction, there's no certainty, there's no guarantee. Like the example of a weed or a flower or whatever moving through concrete, it's like there's no guarantee of how it is. It's not like it maps out the fucking path. It is the path finding out. Like, it is equatable to the intelligence playing out, just in whatever way, shape, or form that it plays out. And I am that intelligence. We are that intelligence that is playing out in a certain way, but trying to come up with, the correct way for it to play out, thinking that I could know a better way for intelligence to play out. And if I just think about it enough, then just finding out what that is. But it's both an entirely different experience, but one that it's not like it's never been experienced. Like, it's not like we don't experience intelligence at play, or that flow state when we're trying to do something. It's just that there's such a pull of doing it for a specific reason, or having a certain perspective of myself, that it's, even when it is experienced, it's immediately like pinned to there being a reason, like, oh, I'm doing it for me, building this, getting to this spot, because there's the underlying narrative, underlying assumption that I am what I think I am.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when you look at how humanity, although a lot of our culture is the result of us tapping into intelligence, a lot of our consequences the result of us kind of holding that consequence, or holding that intelligence back, right? And what I mean is, like, there are so many inventions that just aren't approved because they would threaten the powers that be. There are so many insights that just aren't accepted because it's not coming from academia. It's just coming from somebody without a university education, that kind of thing. Like, there's intelligence and awareness and insights popping up all the time, and all of our industries change as a result. I mean, how many people online have become successes just because of their message as opposed to their credentials? So intelligence is always there. We've had it forever, popping up through philosophers and speakers, and certain religious figures, and so on and so forth. And insight is always there, regardless of how much we try to fight back the flow of change, the flow of intelligence, just because we're afraid of where it might go. And it always goes in a direction that we don't understand, because whatever it is we're changing into isn't what we are right now. Right? Like, that's the thing that frightens us. It's the same reason we hold on to our idea of ourselves, because I don't know who I'd be without it. I don't know what that version of me in the future is going to be without all of the things that I'm holding on to right now, the idea of myself that I'm holding on to right now. And we do the same thing as a species. We don't know what it would be like to abandon the things that we currently think humanity is. We don't know what it would be like to abandon our fears and our needs and our petty desires, and the things that drive our quote unquote economy. Like, that's the most important thing in the world. Like, we really are caught in a mentality that is stagnating, but we're afraid to let it go because we don't know what that will mean. Everything will change, and we don't know what that will mean. And it's terrifying to a lot of people because, again, they lack faith in themselves, because they have an idea of who they are rather than recognizing that we are all intelligence itself. It's really easy to have faith in intelligence itself when you recognize that all of our endeavors are slight distortions of of that intelligence at play. We get in the way of it truly expressing itself. Again, look to art if you want to understand intelligence, because that is intelligent expression for sure. This has been a fun episode. A lot of fun. And in fact, a conversation that I was excited to have because it's fucking early where I am right now. It's prior to 6 a.m. So this has been a lot of fun. I want to say thank you to everybody who could join us recently. Thank you to everybody who's coming to the Vancouver retreat. And lastly, thank you to everybody who's coming to the Netherlands retreat. We really appreciate you being there. We appreciate you supporting the community. And we're going to appreciate the chance to actually hang out with you, get high and shoot the shit, let our intelligence play out without needing to be anything. It's going to be a lot of fun because it really is just about play.
Yeah, very, very excited for that. Fucking pumped for Vancouver. Everyone who's going to be there, it's going to be a blast. So this has been an awesome conversation. Appreciate you hopping on so early here, and yeah, excited to see everyone and chat with everyone very soon.
Stay frosty.